I think we can all agree that the Steiner D-Ball D2 is the best performing civilian IR laser device on the market for the money. Even so, I think a lot of people, myself included, find something really unappealing about the D2. The fact that it's the biggest and heaviest laser device, the fact that it uses LED instead of laser-based illumination, the fact that nobody likes buying a neutered civilian device in the first place, and the fact that, like a lot of Steiner products, this thing sort of tends to fall apart under its own weight in the first few weeks of ownership. But the power level of the D2 is addicting, and the price point is really attractive. Right now, I think you can still pick up the D-Ball D2 for under $1,300. It's almost always the same price or a little bit cheaper than the D-Ball A3, which is a laser-based civilian legal device and is therefore extremely anemic compared to the D2. It's more expensive than the D-Ball i2 9007, which was my favorite device, although since it's now discontinued, it's a little bit tough to recommend, and the prices for it seem to be fluctuating quite a lot. And after the recent price increase on the B.E. Meyer's MAWL C1, that now costs about 3 times as much as a D-Ball D2. But the D2 is still kind of a tough choice for a lot of people to make because it is so big and so heavy. If you put this thing on a gun and you haven't done everything you can to mitigate the weight and balance problems, it's gonna ruin the gun. Particularly if you have a high-performance white light and a suppressor and a nice optic setup, you're going to hate the gun every time you shoot it until you shoot it at night, and then you're gonna remember, oh yeah, I like that power level, it's pretty cool. In terms of raw performance potential, the D-Ball D2 is pretty much identical to the MAWL C1. I know a lot of people probably don't believe that right off the bat, but I've never been able to tell a really appreciable difference between them. It's just the little quality of life things and the controls that make the MAWL a much more attractive device. Also, to be perfectly honest with you, the D-Ball D2 is not much heavier than the MAWL C1, and in a lot of ways, it's less bulky. The D2 weighs in at 12.5 ounces, the MAWL weighs in at a little bit over 11 ounces. So it is not as heavy as a D2, but it's the second heaviest IR laser device on the market. Considering that an ATPL PEC 15 weighs in at like 7-ish ounces, and the other Steiner laser boxes like the i2 and the A2 and the A3 weigh in at approximately 8 ounces. The MAWL and the D2 both weigh about a quarter pound more than most of the standard style laser boxes on the market. The D2 and the MAWL are also both comparably bulky, they just wear their bulk in a different way. The MAWL's main advantage is that it sits super low on the top rail and hangs off entirely to one side. You can also switch the tail cap piece and the emitter assembly from side to side to make it a left-handed or right-handed device. That's really excellent if you want to use a magnified optic and you don't want the device to intrude into the window. Can't say the same for the D2. It is the biggest and tallest laser box on the market. You can really get a sense for how much taller it is than most other devices when you look at the height of the Railscale's Leaf add-on iron sights compared to the i2. The D2 is just fucking huge, but it sits on the top of the rail. It doesn't hang off to either side. If you're using one of these things in conjunction with, for example, an extra tall red dot sight, which a lot of people want to do for night vision anyway, then the height of the D2 is no longer that big of a problem. A combination of a D-Ball D2 and a nice white light actually seems to take up less space on a gun than a MAWL C1 and a nice white light. The D-Ball D2 also plays a little nicer with dual lead tape switches. If you're setting up the MAWL, you're going to have to find a place for your white light button or mount the white light in such a way that you can access it with your thumb. A lot of that is going to depend on personal preference, how you hold a gun, where you like your white light to be, where you like your sling attachment to be, etc. It's possible you'll find the MAWL to be less bulky than a D2, and it's also possible you won't. Since the weight, bulk, and performance are pretty comparable between the MAWL and the D2, the big difference comes down to the controls and the ergonomics. The MAWL has a lot of versatile capabilities that are all available literally at your fingertips. You don't have to fiddle with a little switch or mess around with a focusing lens like you do on the D2. You can bridge some of that gap between the D2 and the MAWL with some aftermarket upgrades. For example, this one has a diffuser cap on it that's made by Villain Weapon Systems. The MAWL and the D2 both use different illuminator technology than, for example, the D-Ball i2, so they are able to be much more powerful while still remaining as civilian legal devices. The MAWL uses a VCSEL emitter, vertical cavity side emitting laser, something like that, I actually don't care, and the D2 uses an LED with a big focusing lens. On the MAWL, you can quickly switch between different power levels of both flood and spotlight illumination. The D2 has 2 different power levels for the illuminator controlled via the switch on the back, and if you rotate the focusing head, you can go all the way down to 2 degrees, or you can back it all the way out to more of a CQB spill. At their most focused, the illuminators of the MAWL and the D2 are both approximately 2 degrees. The Villain Weapon System's Diffuser replaces the lens cap that comes on the D2, and when you flip it over in front of the Illuminator, it provides an extremely wide beam for CQB. This gives you ready access to both potential extremes of the IR Illuminator. You can leave it focused all the way in at the superfine 2-degree point, and then you can flip over the diffuser cap to get instant access to your CQB illumination. It's not going to be quite as fast and easy as the MAWL, but it's still way easier than the D2 as it comes out of the box. I don't typically like to use the illuminator of the D2 focused all the way in, partly because it's got a weird ring artifact that looks kind of goofy, and partly because it's a little too bright and too focused for most instances. If you back it off just a little bit, then the illumination pattern becomes much cleaner and a little bit more usable at most intermediate ranges, and you can still flip over the diffuser cap to get instant access to that totally blown out CQB illuminator. With the diffuser cap on, the D2 performs very similarly to a vampire weapon light. An extremely wide illumination pattern like that isn't super useful outside of CQB. It also splashes badly off of nearby obstacles, and also after you take 1 or 2 shots, you're going to be illuminating a big cloud of smoke in front of yourself. So again, just an option for CQB, but it's nice to be able to readily access that without having to spend a couple seconds dialing the head all the way out. So the Villain Systems Diffuser is a big quality of life upgrade on the D2, and it does a lot to bridge the gap in performance between the D2 and the MAWL. It also serves as a higher quality replacement lens cap because unfortunately the D2 has some typical Steiner build quality problems. The laser port cover on my D-Ball D2 broke off the first day that I had it. I have not been able to source any replacements online. It almost looks like Steiner discontinued replacements. I'm not totally sure why. Also, after using it a couple of times, the rubber strap part on the Illuminator lens cover started to get a little bit torn, so nice to just replace that with the Villain Systems Diffuser. Now, if only they could make a replacement lens cover or even a pattern generator for the laser part of the D2, then I would be extremely happy. Everybody go bother them on Instagram about that right now. There are a few other odd quirks about the D2 that you really can't overcome so easily. Number one is that the fire button is facing to the rear instead of being on top of the device. Now, granted, if it was on top of the device, it would almost be impossible to use because of how fucking big this thing is. Being on the rear of the device means, in theory, you can very easily use the fire button onboard the device with your support hand thumb, similar to how you might activate certain weapon lights. It seems pretty good in theory, but in practice, it's a little bit difficult to use. The button is very small and doesn't have a distinct activation click, so it's very easy to accidentally double tap it, for example, under recoil, and then your laser and illuminator stick on, which can definitely get you killed into streets. There's also only one power level for the IR laser designator on the D2. You can have a low or high power illuminator and a low or high power vis laser, but the IR pointer is one mode only. Also, you cannot zero the illuminator on the D2, which means that you're probably going to end up zeroing your IR laser and then finding out that it's a little bit off center in your illumination pattern. It's not the end of the world, but it is irritating, and it's a problem that very few other devices have. And the last big oddity of the D-Ball D2 is that the IR illuminator is visible to the naked eye. It gives you this big red ring of death effect if you're close enough to see the device. The same thing happens with Surefire vampire weapon lights, and it also does happen with VCSEL-based illuminators like the MAWL and the KIJI, although to a much lesser extent.
Oh, there it is. And I'm heading to the right of him. Now I can't see it. Let me go back. Super freaking bright, super noticeable, and gone. So it's a small cone. It is literally the cone of death. That is so bright, though.
Now vampire instead of
Oh, and I can see it. Oh, that's a vampire?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, I can see the vampire from any angle. And it's really bright to the naked eye. Turn on the D2 again. I want to see if I can. Yeah, I can see that with the naked eye as well. It's actually extremely bright, and my eyes are starting to hurt. So I think I'm done looking at it.
I've been told numerous times by airsofters that the red ring of death gets people killed in airsoft matches all the time, but keep in mind that airsoft games are played at exaggeratedly close distances, so maybe it's not that big of a deal. Even with the diffuser cap off, the LED-based illuminator of the D2 splashes more off of nearby objects than the MAWL does, even at similar focus levels. I guess that probably has something to do with the size of the emitter assembly. Even though you're projecting a very focused 2-degree beam downrange, there's still a lot of splash coming off the inside of the tube. That's an issue for a couple of reasons. Number one, if you're illuminating something that close to you, it might cause your tube to auto-gate or auto-gain, making it harder to see past the bright illuminated spot into the darkness beyond. The other issue is that those reflections will make you a lot more visible, even to somebody who isn't looking down the axis of your illuminator. You're sort of highlighting yourself with a little puddle of light. So there you go, that's the D-Ball D2. It has a lot of quirks and downsides, probably more than any other laser device on the market, but it's also extremely powerful and relatively affordable, so it's still fairly attractive. The D-Ball D2 is still a solid option while we wait for something else to happen in the civilian night vision laser market. The US NV Designate IRV is promising, but a little bit unproven. EOTech has made a lot of pretty grandiose claims about their on-gun laser, but I'm still skeptical that it will come out on time and under budget. The Phantom Hill CTF2 is quite a lot of laser for the money, but the form factor means it may not find a home on certain guns. So if you want to wait and see, I'm sure something interesting will come along soon, and if not, the D-Ball D2 is a pretty good stopgap. Just make sure you set your night vision gun up in a sensible way, and don't skip bicep day. Thanks for watching, guys. See you guys next time.
Hey, you're getting better at that. No, spoke too soon.
Why did you say that?
Spoke way too soon.
You broke my brain.